Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Nari Ely, and we will boldly go into lower decks. Nari, how are you this evening?
I am doing fantastic in sunny California once again. How are you, Josh?
Excellent. So, for those who might not recall, Nari was in Washington, D.C. She's now about 25 minutes away from me, so we'll eventually do these in person. So, it's awesome to have you in the same county.
Yes.
Quite the change from last year at this time. So it's good stuff. So moving aside, what have you thought of Lower Decks so far?
So far, I am absolutely tickled as I was the first time. This to me is still some of the best Star Trek that's come out in the last several years, at least. Well, no, now we're going to get into whether it's better than Picard. No. But it is very true to Star Trek. It's really lovely. It seems to be once again, or yet again, made by people who both have an excellent sense of humor and truly love Star Trek and have pretty deep knowledge of what came before. I'm really enjoying this second season.
Agreed, because especially in the second episode, we see a lot of love to decades worth of Trek callbacks, and we will get there shortly. So, with that, let's jump into the season two premiere, which was Strange Energies, which is a beautiful homage to Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot with the callback to Gary Mitchell and Strange Energies. So, let's break that down because we begin with Mariner having a workout video that's on the holodeck where she is escaping a Cardassian prison, which has echoes of Chain of Command. We have a Miranda class ship that she gets away in. There's lots of references, if you, especially looking at all the different ships that are in the Cardassian space dock. Let's jump into some of those issues. So, to begin with, I just want to say torture is bad. And we have a Cardassian who's going to torture Mariner, and we find out there's a holographic Boimler as well who's getting the light treatment. Nari, can you talk us through the
Light
elements?
treatment. Just for anyone who's not familiar, it doesn't mean he's being treated lightly.
No, no, that there are five lights. And let's get into what is torture.
Yeah, so torture generally is, we're talking about, stems from the law of war. It's talking about treatment of prisoners. Of course, it can also have applications elsewhere. It's just a, general term that we understand to mean that when you're inflicting pain, discomfort on someone in order to elicit information. But this comes from originates from the law of war and the treatment of prisoners. And it's really important to note, of course, that, torture is not limited to physically mangling someone. It's not limited to whether or not you can prove that they actually felt pain. This is why there was a very significant controversy in the United States in the not so distant past about whether or not certain psychological things that you could do to a person, including like sleep deprivation, playing loud music, things like that, could constitute torture. And it's important to note that the definitions that we normally point to don't include the kinds of limitations that I think people might often assume would be included incorrectly, including that it's physical, including that you can prove that it causes some kind of pain as opposed to just some kind of psychological problem or trauma.
Let's take a look at the California definition, which says any person with the intent to cause cruel or extreme pain and suffering for the purpose of revenge, extortion, persuasion, or any sadistic purpose inflicts great bodily injury as defined in section 12022.7 upon the person of another is guilty of torture, and it doesn't require proof of the person suffered actual pain. Playing loud music could fall under that definition, and so could, again, showing someone lights could definitely fall under that as well. But with the
Well, showing someone lights and insisting that there are only four.
yeah, that said, what the Cardassian has out with all of the torture devices, clearly going for the physical torture.
Yeah,
The
that's what I would call classic torture
Yes,
implements. Not the modern newfangled stuff.
Not torture diet torture or torture light, old fashioned torture. And we find out that this is a holodeck. Now, there's a lot to talk about here because you love holodeck liability.
I do.
What kind of like warning label needs to go on to that prison break holo novel so someone who uses it knows what they're getting into, like literally with a torture scene?
Yeah, so the kinds of warnings you might need to have with that. So people may actually be unaware that they get a lot of this stuff already. So it would be things that you see at the beginning of a lot of commercially available video games. So first of all, things that, there could be things in this hollow novel that could cause seizure. There could be things that could cause people to have heart attacks. If you have a heart condition or use beta blockers, like all those kinds of warnings, a lot of people I think gloss over them. But if you are playing very commonly available video games right now, if you stop and actually look at the fine print that shows up on your screen briefly before the game launches, a lot of this is already there. So a lot of that would almost certainly have to come at the start of this, because if someone is, has an adrenal condition or a heart condition or anything like that, there is even with the safety protocols turned on such that you're not experiencing actual pain or bodily harm, you could probably kill someone with that.
Bad workout video. So it just, I mean, like, I understand leg day, I get that, but it just seems really high
I
risk.
lost it at that, Josh. That was hilarious.
It's
Why are
not
you doing squats? We're about to die. Stop that.
it's leg day. It was also nice seeing the Miranda class bridge
Hmm.
looking very, very much like Wrath of Khan. So that was fun. In addition to the whole number being 1877, following several models after Reliant, and the name of the vessel was McDuffin, if I remember right. So again, just kind of fun stuff that they were having with. Uh, you focused on the issue of cleaning buildings, which is
Yeah.
help.
So I don't know if anyone else watching, if you, Josh, when she first suggested, I know that we don't have permission to do this, but I'd really like to go down and power wash some of those buildings because they haven't cleaned them since their industrial revolution. Um, the first thing that jumped out at me is, wow, you could get in a lot of trouble for that, and not just with Starfleet. So yeah, it turns out that cleaning a building that you do not own can actually carry serious risk of both civil and criminal liability. And this sounds really weird, but just bear with me for a second. So the crime of vandalism, and there would be an attendant tort such as damage to or defacement of property, things like that, doesn't actually limit itself to adding something to a building, to breaking a piece off. It's just essentially changing a building in a way, or damaging it, and damage can be a pretty broad term here, that causes it to lose some kind of value. It could be also sentimental value if somebody had painted something on their house that they really liked, and sometimes painting something on their house, even something that looks like graffiti, can have a lot of economic value. There was a case a handful of years back, I believe it was in New York City, in which a property owner had commissioned a relatively locally famous graffiti artist to paint a mural on their wall. Some, upstart person thinking they were going to clean up the neighborhood, I suppose, washed it off. And yeah, so in that case, because it was in particular a locally famous graffiti artist, they actually lost property value when this mural went away. So in this case, ironically, by cleaning the buildings without the consent of the owners, they of course also set off, or Mariner also sets off this incredible chain of events. But just the fact that she started by doing this without anyone's consent could cause problems. Now, of course, if nothing had gone wrong and instead they just uncovered the pretty murals that they didn't realize were there before, there's always the little fire break here, which is that people won't actually litigate or sue or prosecute if it's a situation where you actually did do someone a favor and nobody's upset. But if someone is upset, you are running a risk if you do not have the property owner's prior consent.
trespass.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Sorry. Good point, Josh.
Breaking down the basics. Yeah, it's a trespass. Now, it's interesting that it's a like a sonic cleaner,
Yeah.
and so like there's no wastewater running down the street. So like that's at least a positive because that could carry different environmental tort type issues. If
Although with the sonic cleaner, isn't it going into the air?
like we never really talked about that on how the sonic shower works. We haven't. Um, I think I would want water, but I understand portable water on a ship could be problematic. It's not like they have a desalinizer on board that because they're in space, so it makes sense. But yeah, there are issues with that, and with making a bigger mess to clean up because that waste has to go someplace.
I have a quick question for you, Josh.
Yeah.
Is this the first time? So I think I might be getting ahead of ourselves, but is the first couple episodes here the first time that we have seen an actual sonic shower in use in Star Trek? Like, or has it just been alluded to before?
No,
Okay.
we've seen them. We actually twice, at least twice. So one time would be in the Naked Time, where
Oh, yes.
because the guy who fully dressed guy in the shower, and then Star Trek: The Motion Picture with Ilea when she returns, she's in the shower.
Mm.
So that's how they kind of get an implied nude scene in that film. So yeah, I don't remember if there's any next gen episodes with it. The decontamination scenes in Enterprise also kind of bordered on that, and like
Hmm.
those were just kind of let's make it weird and sexy, and but it's going to feel more weird and awkward than anyone wants to. No one would want this to happen to them. So, but that's my memory.
And I'm
My
sorry, I think I might be getting. Am I getting ahead of ourselves, or was that in the strange?
yeah, just a little bit, just a little
Okay, okay, okay.
bit.
Let's keep going. Sorry.
Uh, Now we get into the issue of medical treatment and having medical consent. Now, doctors can't just go perform medicine on people without consent. And using the cultural classic Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, there's a wonderful issue there where, the female doctor under the control of Dracula wants to take out Chick's brain and put it into Frankenstein's creature. So doctors are required to explain to patients proposed medical procedures within the accepted standards of the medical profession so that a reasonable person would understand the risks of undergoing the procedure or the alternatives.
Hmm.
So putting electric shock devices on someone who suddenly starts eating pears, who's going on a third date with a woman who uh, wasn't into running system checks. Like all of that's just a little weird. And then going like, hey, we should take out his brain so we can work on it. That's where the Frankenstein element comes in
Definitely.
because that's not an accepted practice anywhere. Now in the 24th century, maybe tuning up somebody's brain could be a thing. After all, Rutherford is a cyborg. But, they do talk about he did kind of get scrambled with having, his implant ripped out. So,
Well,
uh,
yeah, and I think you've touched on something extra interesting, which is, of course, present in the Star Trek universe here, which is, does it change at all if what you're dealing with is an android? And this came up, a number of times with other android characters, notably Data. It would reprogramming the holographic doctor on Voyager, for example, be any kind of a problem since they're a machine. Now, I don't want to get too deep into that particular rabbit hole because I think there's still a little bit more we can talk about informed consent, which is much more on the nose for this episode. But I just wanted to highlight that at least in a universe where we all agree that there are artificially intelligent creatures, and they have self-awareness, that we would classify this in a similar way. That performing a reparative function would still require that being's consent. But just to really hammer in on this consent thing, like I love Tendi. She is easily one of my very favorite characters in this show. I love her to pieces. She has some very serious medical ethical issues in this show. As you were just pointing out, the electrical shocks, there is actually still occasionally electrical shock used as medical therapies. We've gotten much better than we used to be about doing that to people in wanton and involuntary ways. But it actually still can be useful when someone does need to reform a neurological connection. However, you cannot give someone informed consent while administering the treatment, which is what she does, because says that, it's going to be a mild pain. Well, how mild? Ow, that really hurt. And can you give me more warning? No, actually, sorry, it has to come unexpectedly, beep, and pushes it again. That's not how informed consent works. It all has to happen ahead of time. The other thing that's really important is, of course, you can't lie to someone in order to obtain informed consent. So in this case, as it comes out towards the end, Tendi doesn't actually think that he has cyborg memory degradation disorder, and is just concerned that his personality has changed. And in those circumstances where either you literally don't have informed consent because someone is actively and repeatedly telling you no, or because you've obtained it through some kind of fraud, in this case by lying to someone that they even have a disease in the first place, you actually essentially have battery here. And that's what's kind of interesting, is that because a lot of medical treatments are so intimate and invasive by their nature and deal with, touching and cutting into people's bodies or introducing new substances to their bodies, we take it very seriously if you've failed to obtain informed consent. And in those cases, a doctor could actually be guilty of the crime and civil tort of assault and battery.
Taking a vaccine, where you're explained you could feel nauseous, feel good for a couple days. It is hunting him with a rifle.
With a gun, yes.
And moreover, interrupted a date where he could have gone swimming with girls. That's just cruel and horrible, and
also could be torture.
Yeah, it's just
excessively cruel.
Negligent infliction of emotional distress.
Yes.
It's just horrible.
Also, was that a callback, Josh, that it was the cetacean unit or something like that? Because it's the whales?
Maybe. Wow. That good catch. I was thinking of what others like swimming episodes were there. But that's a very
It was the girls in the cetacean something like cetacean science team. And the only that seems significant because of the whales from the Star Trek movie.
Good catch. Good catch. I missed that. Well done. Very well done. So, but with that, let's keep moving forward. And Ransom goes full revenge god, which is, similar to Gary Mitchell. Not everyone who gets godlike powers goes nuts. For example, when Riker got Q-like powers, he did not go full revenge god. Things like that. So, not everyone. It's not like a Ring of Gaiji situation where any sort of power would turn a good person bad. But Ransom does go off the deep end pretty badly. And he then comes back, and we have an issue of, can we argue the insanity defense for him? Now, let's talk about the rule and then talk about what happened with him. First off, we would need clear and convincing evidence that Ransom was unable to appreciate the nature and quality or the wrongfulness of his actions because of a severe mental disease or defect. Now, he goes full omniscient revenge god, and he can read people's minds. He has a heightened sense of awareness at that point. Again, very similar to Gary Mitchell. Is that a disease or defect by becoming all-knowing and all-powerful?
So, I think That alone, probably not. And I think this touches on a little bit of what you just mentioned, Josh, which is that not everyone who has received essentially omnipotence or omniscience has gone down this path. If I remember correctly, the original series episode with Gary Mitchell, there was also a woman who was like a classical studies and moral philosopher who was able to be reasoned with and did remember, at least for a while, or decide for a while, that what they were doing was wrong. So I'm not sure that that alone would constitute clear and convincing evidence that they were unaware of either what they were doing, that can't possibly be true because they're omniscient, or what the wrongness of it. That one though is an interesting aspect, because if it's not just the fact that you're omnipotent or omniscient that's making you do that, there still could be something else involved in this process of becoming deified, that does, in at least some people, negate sort of their ability to do moral reasoning.
And the character that you mentioned was Dr. Elizabeth Denner. And I couldn't remember her name. I had to look it up. So
No, I couldn't either. Thanks for looking it up.
I don't have an encyclopedic memory of every Trek episode. But she does help in stopping Mitchell. So she retains a good chunk of her humanity while she's still getting kind of seduced by the
Yeah,
power.
actually, I just remembered now, when I was watching this, I had to like pause and correct and explain to my boyfriend that Gary Mitchell was not only defeated by Kirk hitting him with a boulder, there was also this whole thing about another person who got hit with strange energy, and they weakened him because they were still able to appreciate morality. And then Kirk hit him with a boulder.
The fact you had to pause and explain that to your boyfriend, I'm sure would have loved to have watched that, just popcorn out with like, okay, I'm sorry for the person I'm about to become, but this is what's going on
Yes.
here. Second pilot where no man's gone before,
Yes.
which is why the uniforms are different and we never see that style again. So
I didn't realize that. Interesting.
the women wore pants. So that was
I'm gonna rewatch this. I'm gonna rewatch this as soon as I log off.
yeah, the female characters wore pants as they did in the original pilot as well. So and then they said let's give them skirts because it was the 60s. Anyway, so yeah, Dr. Elizabeth helped. But yeah, so that brings us to the necessity defense. So Mariner decides to kick Ransom in the neutral zone. Now, she's striking a superior officer, and she's also going against her captain's orders, which is
Mm-hmm.
also her mom. So, like, that's doubly bad mojo right there. But she would have to prove that the harm that would have resulted from compliance with the law would have significantly exceeded the harm actually resulting from the defendant's breach of the law. So, assaulting Ransom by kicking him repeatedly caused him to free the ship and to bring him back down to humanity
Mm-hmm.
because he
To barf up the strange energy is what it appears.
and that still wasn't it. Then we get to the second part, which is dropping the boulder on him, which is that element of the necessity defense as well, because that's a very non-traditional medical treatment. So
Yes.
for the first issue, Mariner disagrees with her mother several times. And
Just in this episode.
just, yeah, in the span of like 3 minutes when the ship's
Yes.
under attack. So, I mean, like, you can have the debate between hit him with phasers, overpower him versus not. That could be a reasonable, debate, but it's not an unlawful order that the mother was given. And the mother should be, the captain is in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So what she says goes, just from a military chain of command, that she's the one in charge.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you have to deviate for some reason, but the praise and validation was starting to work until Ransom, again went off the deep end with like, hey, I should be captain too. Again, there could have been a different way to have handled that with like, yeah, one day you can have your own ship. Like there could have been a different way
I
out.
think it's just around the corner for you, Ransom.
Yeah, I thought you should be captain one day too. I've been thinking about I'm planning to put you in. So that could have worked. But it doesn't.
Yes.
And so I think under the circumstances, because of the danger that was happening with Ransom going full revenge god, kicking him, there was a necessity to do that.
Mhm.
Now, you want to take dropping the boulder on him?
So, I mean, that one's a little tough because when Mariner is kicking him, right, he literally has the Cerritos in his teeth, right? Like there are many, many lives actively in danger, not just in the abstract future that he could harm, but right in that moment. Once he has been repeatedly kicked in the neutral zone, Mariner seems to maybe need to give him an occasional kick to keep him under control, but he is no longer actively about to harm or kill many people. The boulder is debatable because of that. It's he seemed to be under control. They could have applied some kind of medication at that point, like the doctor had been planning to in the first instance before he turned her hypospray into an ice cream cone. So that one, I think in that case, though, you're going to have the same circumstance where at the end of the day, you do have to have someone decide to prosecute this. And in those circumstances, I would see someone letting that slide.
I also think there's occasion for it because the precedent that they had beforehand,
It's true.
like okay, the two super beings killed each other basically, and then Kirk had to finish the job by dropping a boulder on Mitchell in order to completely stop him. So, and given that what's at stake of murder god, that could be reasonable under the circumstances. It's also important to note they don't kill Ransom.
Yes.
So I don't know what the gravity was like there, but dropping the boulder on him, or if they
Josh,
could
it's
just,
because he has abs of steel.
yeah, he is in amazing shape. So, but even with the muscles there, like maybe that's what held everything together after the skeleton crushed,
Exactly.
including the spine. So the doctor has to put everything back together. And it's okay. And
Full recovery is what they said. So
again, he's in amazing shape. Just stellar.
Also, I loved that about this episode, that the thing apparently Ransom most wanted to do once he could do absolutely anything in the universe was just to lift more weights.
I mean, he does carve a mountain, his face into a mountain, make a moon
That's true.
disappear.
But
And,
he wastes a lot of deity time just getting more exercise done.
yeah, and then making his ransomites do exercise.
Yeah.
So the cult thing is also bad. But again, if you're going to get turned into a cult, at least it's doing a workout. So it
Yeah,
could be,
there's worse. There's just worse, is what I'm saying.
yeah, there's no poison Kool-Aid, like there's no one dying horribly. Uh, but still, like it's still not good.
No.
It's still not good. Now, which brings us to the next episode, Kayshon, his eyes open. Now, this is fun because Darmok is my favorite Trek episode.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, it's definitely top five for a lot of folks, and people can debate. Well, I like Balance of Terror just a little bit more, or if I'm hungry, I might like this one more. So like that does happen. So reasonable minds can differ. But the fact they brought in a member of that species into the crew, and you're going to have idioms uh, flying, and with people trying to understand each other is hysterical.
Yes.
So let's talk about group showers because that would be a reason to get promoted right there because hoping that you escape, high school and you don't have to shower with other people ever again is like one of the advantages of growing up.
Yeah.
Some people love going to the gym and don't mind that. Others are not.
I don't miss the floor bathroom from college. I'm just gonna put that out there.
No, no. I mean, there could be people who are never nudes. I mean, there are dozens of them, and
Yes.
again, it could be a condition. But the people who are in the lower decks have a communal shower, much like you would see on a warship with
Yeah,
people.
I was just gonna say. I think the closest real world analogy for this is, in fact, in the military. In some circumstances, the United States might have communal showers, although I think the United States military still makes a lot of efforts to provide gendered bathroom facilities. Although there are a number of militaries in the world, I think Sweden, Israel, which have co ed communal bathrooms for their militaries. And it's a little bit interesting. So, on the one hand, you might say that this is something that Boimler signed up for, and if Starfleet is anything like the U.S. government, the federal government, at least the executive branch, is actually carved out of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason why I bring up the ADA is because Mariner mentions, as they're in this communal shower, that Boimler normally leaves this stall next to her open because he is afraid of communal nudity. Now, on the one hand, if all someone has is just a subjective, discomfort, they don't like it, that's something that you normally don't have a sort of special legal right to. It just might mean maybe this isn't the job for you if that's actually a requirement. But if what you have is, let's say, an actual phobia of being nude, so like you just mentioned, if you're a never nude, you literally can't take the shorts off, things like that. Then it might sound a little bit odd to someone at first blush, but the ADA does not clearly define what qualifies as disabilities in terms of like listing conditions. There are some conditions that Congress explicitly carves out of it and says are not going to be covered. But in general, a disability is anything, I have the definition here, that is a sufficiently severe condition such that it substantially impairs one or more major life functions. Maybe getting nude to take a sonic shower is a major life function. You could also look at it this way instead. If forcing Boimler to be communally nude once or twice, or once a day or every other day causes him severe anxiety because of his phobia, or causes him to be unable to go to the bathroom or things like that. Those would also potentially, you could argue, would qualify. And in those circumstances, the ADA creates this essentially individual relationship in which the person who has the phobia, so Boimler, would have to go to Starfleet and say, I have this serious phobia, this is substantially impairing me to do these things. Can you offer me a reasonable accommodation? And so in these circumstances, assuming that we agree with all of these little hypotheticals, that this is a real phobia, that it is actually going to impair Boimler's functioning, then Starfleet, and assuming Starfleet is not exempt, then they probably would have to offer him a private sonic shower. I should note that even though the federal government's executive branch is not covered by the ADA, it is nonetheless covered by other statutes which prevent discrimination on the basis of a disability. You just may not be able to go and ask your boss for a reasonable accommodation.
Or shower at a different time.
Yeah.
So there are ways around it, but literally when everyone in the same shift sleeps in the same area and showers together, that does just seem a little creepy because there should be some boundaries. And shower time, no, I just that's just a little too weird for most people. So it'd be a good reason to become a lieutenant junior grade so you don't have to shower with others. Now, we do get into the issue that a lot of geeks have with collecting. And right out of the gate, there's a reference to the menagerie, which
Mm-hmm.
is, again, the two-parter. That's the um, uh, original pilot broken up. So, but let's talk about the issue that you identified with trying to collect, uh, Rutherford, and also the reference to data. So we can talk about artificial life.
Oh, yes.
He,
So
he just wanted to
there's
do.
there's a couple angles that you and I could look at this from. The first is, I think, the, let's say, low hanging fruit, which is making someone involuntarily part of your menagerie. So that one's obvious. There's going to be a lot of legal problems with that. Just in our laws, you cannot own a person as property. You cannot even, and this is the slightly more interesting dimension perhaps, you cannot even contract with someone for them to work for you for no labor, or which I think you could make an analogy here, or for you to theoretically own them. So it's kind of a funny thing when the guy hands, was it Rutherford? Sorry, Rutherford, his card and says, if you're interested, I have a great menagerie. So at least they're not kidnapping him like they did with Data in order to involuntarily make him part of a menagerie. But it's interesting that the 13th Amendment is one of the few parts of our Constitution that arguably applies directly to citizens, to people, rather than simply, a right, a protection that you have against the government, or an obligation the government has towards you. It's just that there won't be any slavery here. People should not be held. You can't have work without labor. So that means that even if you agreed to this, so he said, yeah, sure, that kind of sounds nice, I could be taken care of and I'll just be your property, which, I'm glad, of course, he wasn't interested in that. That's crazy. You would have a serious problem if you ever tried to show up in court to enforce that in any way, shape, or form. And if anyone found out about it, arguably the government would have an obligation to go in and stop it.
To go, this is my resort and you can stay here, like that. Cool. So this is a like a human rights preserve. Awesome. I'll just
Unique humanoid life preserve. I'll take care of anyone who wants to come.
cool. So it's going to take a lot of stress off my plate. Goodbye to bills, and I'll just hang out here. Downside is you're an exhibit. So yeah. But this brings up the next issue, and that's with property and when somebody dies. So property can be controlled through a will.
Mm-hmm.
And if a person doesn't have a will, it goes through intestate succession, which is, like who are the children and then who are parents. It gets super complicated. You need a decoder ring to follow all of the twists and turns. And if there's nobody there,
make a will.
Yeah. And if there's nobody there, it goes to the state. You can't take the position, if I can't have it, no one will. So you can't control your property, in perpetuity after death. Like you can control who it goes to, but it can't be, I will kill whoever tries to, distribute my property, because you can't have lethal defense of property. So this clearly is lethal defense of property by turning Kayshon into a puppet, which raises the issue that they have the same plot device twice. The leader of the away team gets zapped in each episode. I don't know if that's going to be a recurring theme or not, but it's weird to see that back to back.
I have a query though, Josh. Was it lethal to turn Kayshon into a doll? He apparently was still alive.
Yeah. Fair point. But there
as evidenced by the little note on his hospital bed or his sick bay bed.
So while he was still alive as a puppet, as a permanent member of the menagerie at that point, there were other systems that would have been fatal, like being sucked into the anomaly with the crushing device. Like that would be fatal. The vacuums.
Death by Roomba. I thought that was great. The space Roombas, by the way.
It goes to show, like, don't kick things. Like, don't be overly aggressive, because you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So problems across the board, because that material should go through probate. Should be, if it's going up to the estate, or if it goes through the Collectors Guild, like maybe they have special rules on this.
But I was going to say the Ferengi have very different rules of succession.
Yeah, but there is a roadmap to make sure that property just doesn't become abandoned. And if his goal is just to maintain a space station with all this stuff, like a fortified storage locker, That's just kind of weird.
Mhm. And I just wanted to highlight that I don't know, if any people who are listening did not study for a bar exam or go to law school, you may not have heard the phrase rule against perpetuities, but it is actually very important to our legal system that although you can make various conditions and requirements and other things for, people who inherit your property in order for them to retain it, and things like that, we basically don't want to create, won't tolerate creating conditions after your death that are then applied to people who are not currently alive and but are alive and are potentially affected by the condition somewhere down the line. I think I might be butchering the rule against perpetuities, but I think that was the general gist of it. Actually applying it is a nightmare. But
Life and being plus 21 years, and we really don't need to go down that road ever again.
yeah, there we go. But the general point of it is that there is a time limit. There is a limit in the law as to how much we will tolerate the will of a dead person reaching out and affecting someone who is still alive.
That and there are things that you would think would not be okay that are. Like one person who passed away was of the Jewish faith and wrote into the will, in order for my son or grandson to get this inheritance, he has to marry a Jewish girl. And that was upheld as being valid. And like, well, that sucks. Like, because now you're literally, saying who you can marry or not in
Mm-hmm.
order to collect inheritance. So I don't know if that was if if that came up today, if would be upheld because our views of like marriage equality are different,
Mm-hmm.
and so maybe that would not fly. But it flew before. So
Yeah, I wonder, would something like the general principle of contract law that you can't have a contract against public interest
mhm.
or public policy, would that apply in that kind of situation? Because those, yeah, this like what I'm referencing, by the way, for listeners, is that you couldn't go to court to say that I contracted with this person to murder and they didn't do the murder, so I want my money back. The judge would first of all call the police, but second of all say that it was a contract against public policy. I'm wondering if there's some kind of background principle that could have been relied upon to negate that, or if maybe the alternative is it would have just negated the will entirely.
So the if I remember the case right, and this goes back to summer of 1999 when I took wills and trusts, so
Mm-hmm.
it's been a while. Because of like the cultural importance that was at play, with wanting to ensure that there were that faith continued, like that's made it okay. But if it'd been like purely racist, like that would not be okay.
Oh God! Now I've imagined exactly what you're thinking about. Oh God.
Yeah, so like if it gone a different direction, that would violate public policy and not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, it was. So again, like that's just one example. There are, of course, many others that are out there, but the moral of the story is you that property would need to go someplace. It just can't be a fortified space station full of stuff forever and ever with a dead guy saying what's going to happen to his stuff.
And also, the moral of the story is everyone should have a will.
Yeah, don't die without one. But it sounds like he actually had a plan, and the plan was if I can't have it, nobody will. And that's just like then it's a pharaoh's tomb at that point.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's just so weird. Uh, but let's talk about Boimler getting teleporter cloned.
Have we talked about teleporter accidents before, Josh? I'm sure we've never talked about that
Yeah,
before.
maybe once or twice in passing. So the idea that again, this just packed full of callbacks to other Trek episodes and basically all of TNG. You have two identical Boimlers at this point, but their personalities diverge. Just as
Mhm.
Will Riker and Thomas Riker became different people because of the experiences that they had. Because if you get end up stuck on a planet for 7 years, you're going to be very Robinson Crusoe, and you will change,
Mhm.
which is why he goes by Tom. Now, Boimler it's way expedited with his personality change of like, oh, call me William. It's like, like ultimate kiss ass at that point of I'll just take my captain's first name. Uh, Again, still consistent with Boimler being Boimler. With
Hmm.
like, learn to bake cookies, that sort of thing to impress the captain. But the Boimlers do a good thing. They get commended for it, but one of them gets demoted and sent to the lesser ship.
Hmm.
That just seems fundamentally unfair that you did everything right, you saved your shipmates, and you get reduced in rank because of it. That just, he would have a case because what's the justification for busting him down in rank because he ends up getting duplicated? What?
So we need Tom in here, but Tom,
Yeah.
um, he would have a case. Except I gotta challenge you, Josh. Except he volunteered.
After was given as an ultimatum.
So that's the thing I wonder though, right? Is he was saying that one of you needs to do so. If he had said, if they had both said no, right, and then they demoted one of them, is it arguable though? Sorry, I'm just playing devil's
Yeah,
advocate here.
or
Is it
what lawyers
arguable though
do. Yeah.
that he stepped forward and said, "I will go," and so therefore volunteered? And if he then made an issue out of it, he would have a harder time.
Agreed. But again, it was presented as a choice of one of you gets reduced in rank.
Yeah,
And it's like, why can't they go to another capital ship? They've proven
yeah.
themselves and maintain the rank as a lieutenant junior grade, as opposed to getting busted down to ensign. So that just, it seemed unfair, and I think there would be a case because there isn't a reason for the demotion. There was no
Mhm.
conduct unbecoming. Like, he didn't do anything wrong. It was clerical and personnel. Like, that can't be the
Yeah.
reason to punish someone. Because
So I just want to note also that it is wild to me that there was no problem with the fact that you now have two, but there's only records of one having gone to the academy and all this other stuff. But they've at least Starfleet seen this before. I'll gloss over it. But um, I did find it fascinating though because I looked into this question a little bit for the previous episode in which there is kind of rampant special treatment between the mother and the daughter serving together on the ship. And I did, this is again, I think Tom would be much better qualified to discuss this. But I didn't actually find a lot, at least in my attempts to research it, of formal, regulatory or statutory prohibitions on relations serving in the same unit in the same chain of command. And in fact, so I didn't find a lot in particular on parent-child relationships, possibly because in our military we don't actually have a lot of people serving with that kind of big of an age difference within the same chain of command. Um, but it's relatively common, or at least not incredibly uncommon, to have spouses. So it's called dual military spouses serving together. And in fact, the military kind of seems to take the opposite tack, which is the military has goes out of its way a bit to try to let people who are dual military spouses serve together in the same installation, so they don't have to have separate deployments and all the things that go along with that. But for whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be a lot of specific formal, laws or regulations specifically addressed to this. Now, granted, there are still catch-alls in the UCMJ. So besides cultural norms against nepotism, there's always conduct unbecoming and all these other things that are catch-alls for misbehavior or abuse of power. So you might be able to get one or both of them on those. But I did find it interesting. So in this case, you have two Boimlers. And whereas Starfleet undoubtedly is at least as egalitarian as the United States military and would let spouses serve together on the same ship, which, has an attendant background concern if there would be special treatment for those people, especially if they're different ranks towards each other, they would probably let people who are dual spouses serve in Starfleet. You can't let two Boimlers serve in Starfleet. Do you not have twins, identical twins, serving in Starfleet?
so there's merit based, you know, uh, views on people serving. I mean, like, President Kennedy appointed his brother to be Attorney General, like, and people were okay with that because Bobby was a good guy, uh, so it was okay. I've seen. Um, I remember in my youth when the Navy had both Alameda and Treasure Island as naval bases. Uh, the captains for both bases were married to each other, and they were guest speakers at a Sea Scout event to talk
Hmm.
about. So again, just highlighting that this was the early '90s, two captains, and they were deployed in the same general area, so you could live. Somebody's driving to work every day. Well, both drive to work, but one's closer than the other, and like you can make that work. I have other friends in the military that uh, were in the same town, but in
Hmm.
different commands and doing different things. So that way they're not like spouse isn't reporting to spouse type of thing.
Hmm.
Even though it is fun to tease a friend with like your wife outranks you. That is a magical feeling. So just
Who doesn't like a strong woman? I'm just gonna put that out there.
you have permission to go home. Yeah, like stuff like yeah. So again, just fun things you can tease a buddy about, but that's not important right now. Is the nepotism with between Mariner and uh, Beckett, um, is bad.
Hmm.
Um, it's one thing, yeah. Just there's no way to handle that. On the flip side, like enhanced punishments for Mariner also like carry
Yes.
an unfairness with like, would you throw anyone else in the brig for that, or are you just like being vindictive towards your very very disobedient daughter who has a
Hmm.
rebellion problem? So it goes both ways with nepotism. uh, that said, it just seems fundamentally unfair to one of the Boimlers gets busted down in rank and sent back to the Cerritos.
I agree. I stand by what I said. I think I honestly don't see the problem with them serving on the same ship in the first place.
Yeah, it does. Did you ever watch Farscape?
I know of the show. I have not watched enough of it to speak with any knowledge.
So in one episode, so they end up having two ships. So there's Moya
Mm.
and then her child ship Talon, which is a part warship. Well, the lead character is Crichton. Crichton gets doubled, and they put a Crichton on each ship. So that way, the actor's doing double duty, and they're able to tell different stories in different places
Hmm.
with the two ships. So I don't know if they're going to do a Farscape maneuver or not, or if this is just the last that we see of the Titan, and the rest is just focused on
I
the.
hope we see a little more of the Titan. I was hoping they were hinting towards the end of the episode also at some point maybe Boimler becoming clone Boimler becoming maniacal and real Boimler having to stop him in some way.
There are always possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated in Riker's ready room. He has a model of the Pegasus, his first ship, on his desk,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see all the records on the bulkhead. I don't know if it's close enough to like to see what those records are, other than I'm sure they're jazz of some kind. But I enjoyed seeing him as a captain and what his decorations were, as opposed to here's my fish tank. Um,
Yeah.
Even though I've had many fish tanks and I will do so again, but that's just seeing the personality at play. So
Also, I know it probably was a little cheesy to some people, but I still am getting a kick out of give me warp and a factor of 5, 6, 7, 8.
yeah,
I really loved it.
no, it's fantastic. They're just leaning in and having fun. So
Yep.
good for them. And that's all that we can ask for. And with this highly addictive um, Star Trek series, that's like mashed potatoes and gravy. It just feels good to ingest, and just fun and good. Now, with that, are there any other issues that you spotted for us to talk about?
Hmm. Um, think we covered most of the big ones. Um, yeah, I think we covered most of the big ones. I'm trying to think if there's any other random side bits and pieces. No, I think that except for continuing to gush about the show, I think we've covered the notes I wanted to hit.
Okay, sounds good. So that's a wrap. Want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you are listening on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts, please leave a review. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in. You can check out extra content on Patreon. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.